So it's going to be, yeah. So this recording will be up there. All right. Well, welcome everyone, and welcome especially to the extensive John Barnes myofascial release community. Welcome to the BiotensegriTea Party. I am Susan Lowell de Solorzano, and I'm here with my co-host, Graham Scarr. Say hi, Graham.
Hello, I'm from sunny Nottingham in the UK.
And Chris Morita Clancy.
Hi, everyone, from just outside of Vancouver on Coast Salish territory in Canada.
And our special guest today, Carol Davis.
Greetings from Maine in the US.
Yes, and I'm in Washington, D.C. in the US. And we're really, really delighted to be doing this today. John Barnes became part of my vocabulary soon after I met Steve Levin. So I know about the connection between the two of them that's been so strong since I think the 70s. Steve, if you want to say something about it.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how I met John, but it was in the 70s. I think it was in Philadelphia. And I was introduced by John Manel, who was a manual therapist par excellence. And we sort of connected and bounced off each other over many years. I occasionally dropped in on one of his courses, and he would always invite me to give a little talk, and I pick up new things from him, and we had a lot of discussions, and we remained interesting friends over years, but never got close that we saw each other all the time. But whenever we did meet, we were always very close and friendly, and we learned a lot from each other.
Thanks, Steve. We do have just a couple of notes before we turn it over to Carol. Chris?
You want to maybe let's turn it over to Carol, and I'll do that when you're setting up the video?
Or no, it's going to take seconds to do the video. Do yours now, I think, if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem at all. Well, hi, everyone. I just want to announce to you that we are trying something new. Next Tuesday, December 5th, we will be premiering our Everything I Know episode number 11, and Leonid will be interviewing Steve. Many of you have seen the earlier episodes. This time round, we're doing a YouTube premiere, and we hope that you will hop on over. I'll put the link in the chat. So if you can't make it, hop on early anyways, click notify, and give us a thumbs up or write a comment even ahead of the time. That's going to help us out a lot. And if you can make it December 5th, that will be at 10 a.m. Vancouver time, 6 p.m. UK time. And hop on, Dave, Leonid, Steve, myself, Susan, other board members, and hopefully many of you will be there to communicate in the chat. So we can't wait for that to happen. Also, we have happening on December 15th, another BiotensegriTea Party. This one won't be live on YouTube. It will be only on Zoom because we're going to have a social. Carol's going to talk to you a little bit more about the archive, who we are, and what we represent in the tea parties. But before we do that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Susan, because Susan, I know you have some information about donations to share with us all.
Oh, yeah. I just want to say that just about from every video that we've got on the BiotensegriTea Archive YouTube channel, you can find a donation link. And especially a lot of you here in the US, where I am, do a lot of end of year donations in December. And I just want to, please consider the BiotenSegriTea Archive. We do almost everything that we do is volunteer. And we try to bring you good information and do a lot of educating and community building and assistance with that. And we have a special donor, anonymous donor, who is matching all donations for the year up until the last day of the year, up to $2,500. So even if you give $10, we'll get 20. So thank you so much. And I think we're going to turn it over to Carol, and she's going to do our opening toast and say other nice things, and then I'll run the video when she's ready.
Thank you, Susan. It's such a great pleasure for me to be here today and to see old friends, and be in community with you around this wonderful topic of biotensegrity. And that features the history and the wisdom of my mentor, John F. Barnes, the physical therapist that I first discovered a whole new way of viewing the world and people and myself, and how my practice with Barnes myofascial release has opened up the quality of my life. And it's very, very much grounded in the concept of biotensegrity. For those of you who are coming here who aren't real familiar with the term and this community, the fact is that we had this marvelous session one time. This is a community of people who are interested in viewing the world from the framework that biotensegrity talks about. And biotensegrity is the science of holism, the science of how the world and all the cosmos, from the nucleus of cells out to the universe, is constructed together, the architecture of the whole and its energetic components, whether it's in building materials, whether it's in planting a garden, whether it's in writing poetry, whether it's in designing a house, whether it's in helping in a movement therapy or manual therapy. These principles come forward as a way of organizing our thoughts and our actions in such a way to bring balance. This community is a wonderfully balanced community of people from all different backgrounds who are interested in understanding this lens of the way they're looking at their work in a larger context. We have music teachers, we have carpenters, we have engineers, we have scholars, we have philosophers, we have academics, we have people from so many different countries, all interested in how the community views biotensegrity from their perspective. And so we get together and have a party about it. And we talk like around the table and say, this is how what you've said impacts my world. Well, what John Barnes had said back in 1989, when I first met him, impacted my world in ways that I couldn't even anticipate. I couldn't even imagine. So that's what we're here today to celebrate. And with our Biotensegrity tea parties, you can be drinking whatever you want, because, you know, it may be 10 after 1 in Maine, but I know it's a lot later than that other places. And so what I want to say is, whatever you're drinking, let's lift a toast to the two people who are most responsible for us being together here today, Dr. Stephen Levin and John Barnes.
Cheers. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Carol, are you ready for me to?
Yes, with just a little bit of an introduction.
Yes, please.
Steve.
And thank you. Oh, I'll say that now that we've done the toast for when we're showing the video and stuff, it's great if you can keep cameras and mics off until we come back around after the video and do the discussion.
And then we can all talk together, right?
Yeah. We can party.
But by way of introduction, Steve Levin suggested several weeks ago, Steve, I'm talking about you in front of you. Please chime in and correct me. I know you would. You said, let's get John on a tea party. Let's talk to him about how he came up with his ideas and so forth. And I said, well, he is limited in his travel and in his sitting time. He had a major accident about a year ago. but I'll talk to him and see if he would like to come forward and if he could be with us for an hour, sit for about an hour. And he said he would rather that I spoke to John, and he said, why don't you interview me? You put together some questions and we'll show the interview. And then if other questions come up after the interview, we can do another video. You can interview me again with that second tier of questions. And so I said, all right, I'll pass it by Susan and Steve and see what they say. And they said, go for it. So that's the background story on this video now that you're going to see that John and I filmed about a month ago. He's in Sedona, Arizona. He's not traveling much still because he's still having a lot of trouble getting around. I'm not traveling much either. But we did a Zoom video, and I put together some questions, and that's what you're going to view this first hour. Then we're going to talk and bring up questions from the material that I'll answer as best I can from my perspective. But that's not John Barnes' perspective, and I'll be glad to take those questions back to him and say, how would you embellish this? How would you change what I said and make it more from your mouth? So I'll do the best I can. So here's the video.
All right.
This is Carol Davis, and I have the pleasure today to talk with John Barnes about the history of his work in manual therapy and physical therapy over the decades that he's been practicing. And I've developed some questions that I'd like to ask him from his history and from his therapeutic practice and teaching and present insights that he has now based on his life's work. And John, it's really good to have you here. Thanks a lot for being willing to do this.
You're very welcome, Carol. It's so good to see you again.
Thank you. John, what were you like as a child? What did you inherit from the world of your childhood?
Well, I guess I was a normal kid. My father died when I was 3. And as an only child, I was very fortunate to have an incredible mother. And she taught me a lot. I didn't have brothers or sisters. People would always say, don't you want a sister? Don't you want a brother? I said, hell no. It's what goes on in other families. Plus, I don't have to share. It's really great.
Right.
But my mother was a very wise woman. And when she would talk about my father, it was always in such loving, positive terms. And I guess she created an image for me of what it was like to be a man or something like that, I guess, because I could develop my own way of being, and thinking for myself and that type of thing.
Uh-huh.
So I was very comfortable as a kid. When I became a physical therapist, I was shocked at the amount of family turmoil that goes on, So fortunately, my fascial release is one of those things that can always help with that kind of distress also. But so I had a good childhood. I was an athlete and pretty much enjoyed life.
You often talked about going out into the woods when you were little. I remember you telling stories of purposefully getting yourself lost.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, before my father died, he bought a gentleman's farm. And he took my mother and I up there all the time. I really loved it up there. It was high on a mountain. It was surrounded by thousands of acres of woodland. So as an only child, I didn't have anybody to play with. So I drift out into the woods and hike on the trails and messed around the creeks, And a couple of times I got lost. So I just projected my mind above the forest and found my way home. I thought everybody could do that. Turns out they can, but most people just don't realize it, I guess. So I used to make a game out of it, and I purposely get lost at times and trying to find my way home.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked pretty well most of the time. And then it was in August, it was very hot and humid there. So during midday, I would find a big old shade tree and I kind of nestle down into the roots to get cooled off a bit. I think this was my first lesson in the value of silence, because I noticed that when I would quiet down, all the forest sounds would kick back in. The birds and squirrels would even come to me. And then so I enjoyed it out in nature, still do. My mother occasionally would go shopping, and I had no interest in shopping, but I was kind of bored at times, so I would go shopping with her. And while she was shopping, I drifted around this little town. And one day I stumbled into this old bookstore, and I, for some reason, became enamored in philosophy and the comparative religions. I had a lot of time to read. So as I read these different books from different cultures and different countries, one day it hit me that, what's everybody fighting about? They're all saying the same thing. It's just different ways of expressing themselves. And as I read through a lot of these different books, they kept talking about an image. They said that we had this luminescent being within us that was truly who we were. That's what today I call our essence. I found that quite interesting. But then as time went on, I guess I kind of forgot about it. And as I got back into therapy, I started to realize over time that a lot of people, their essence had left them. We can come back later as we talk a little bit and come back into more detail about that, because it has a lot to do with our consciousness and healing. We can't heal without true consciousness, but as you know, healthcare has completely ignored consciousness as if it was a bad thing. It's ridiculous.
You call yourself a renegade.
So I said,
You use in the title of your book, the Healing Ancient Wounds, the Renegade's Wisdom.
right.
Talk to us about that.
Well, I feel that everybody has a lot of ancient wounds in them. And myofascial release is basically something that gets the totality of the human being. It comes from our heart. Certainly we use our intellect, but we don't, in our society, too much come from our heart anymore. In our society, it's pretty much programmed us into human doings instead of human beings. So myofascial release treats the being of the human being. Somehow, myofascial release, whether it's the structural MFR, or myofascial unwinding, or the rebound that we do, it somehow gets us in touch with these memories from the past. And so as these memories come up, they can be very healing for us. If you go to my website, myofascialrelease.com, there's an article section there. And one of the articles that helps explain this a little bit more is called Without Awareness, There's No Choice. As we go through life, we think we have awareness, but in actuality, we're coming from a lot of everybody else's programming. And the programming that was induced upon us from schooling and religions and parents and bigger people, that kind of thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
What I've seen is very simplistic. What I've seen, well, first of all, you know, consciousness is just a total taboo in healthcare, traditional healthcare. You can't heal without consciousness. It refutes our moment by moment experience as a human being. Hold on a second. So I have a very simplistic concept that I think is rather practical. Our whole education was based on our intelligence and rationality. I don't consider our education as true education. I think it was mass hypnosis. So mass hypnosis is basically other people's ideas. There's an old saying, if you don't define yourself, somebody else will.
Somebody else will, yeah.
And this is what happened to most of us. We don't realize it. So with myofascial release, it helps us to go into the belief systems. You don't have to change your beliefs, keep the ones that work for you. But those that no longer are relevant to your life today, you can change them. But you can't change anything until you're aware of it. So going back to channel 5, I call our intelligence channel 5. All of healthcare is based on channel 5, order and control.
The intellect, kind of the left brain.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
The problem is that we don't heal in channel 5. So it's been a blind alley for a lot of us, temporary results, frustration. So what myofascial release does in a very efficient, totally safe, highly effective way, it switches into what I call channel 3. That's your intuitive, instinctive side. That's the healing zone.
Mm-hmm.
Neuroscientists have discovered that the database available to us in channel 3 is in excess of 10 million to 1 of that of our intellect.
The
If-
database available to us in our
channel 3,
intuitive side is 10,000 to 1, that which is available to us from our intellectual side.
exactly. And in fact, it's much more than that. It's so vast they just gave up counting it for a while. This is what I call feeling intelligence. It's different than thinking intelligence. It's a different vibrational level.
Uh-huh.
Another word for all of that is wisdom.
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 Mhm.
Each one of us, you and I and everybody, is born with wisdom. But then school kind of beat it out of us.
Mhm.
And when I was very young, as I mentioned, my childhood, finding my way through the forest, I learned to trust my wisdom and my intuition. But then, like everybody, it kind of got beat out of me. Then I had a severe trauma, and that sort of woke me up again. Channel 5, our intellectual side, is, in psychological parlance, it's called consensus consciousness. Another word for consensus consciousness is trance. We have been in a trance. And what healing is all about is breaking through the trance and becoming aware again, awareness. Again, it has to do with consciousness. And can you hear me okay?
Yes. Every individual's awareness is going to be unique to that individual, but the pathway is common to all of us. Is that true?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
So the renegade part is that you were schooled in protocols, in left brain thinking, in memorization, in
Right.
kinesiology. But you, when you started practicing, recognized that the things that you were taught in school didn't make sense to you in terms of what you were experiencing as the healing response. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yes.
So,
Everything, as you know, everything we learned in school is linear and logical. The problem with that, our mind-body complex is neither linear nor logical. We were taught the role and roadmap to reality. In fact, all of science is based, as you know, on reductionist theory.
yeah, the Newtonian part.
Yes,
Mhm.
which was proven by Max Planck, the father of quantum physics, to be a totally erroneous view of the human being. We were pretty much taught a human being, all the research has been done on dead people. Dead people don't have a consciousness.
Mhm.
Dead people are brittle. They have no fluid. Everybody ignored the fascia, the fluid, the fascia, and consciousness. And that's the model of reality we were all taught.
John, the principles that you teach, I remember when I first had my first course with you in 1989, and the principles that you taught, even then, and predated that time, seemed to precede science. Only after you were teaching many of your unique principles, starting in the 70s, did we start to read science that might point to the hypothesized mechanism of action of how those principles and those who followed your principles, your directions while treating, seemed to achieve such positive outcomes when other approaches were largely unsuccessful, following the protocols and getting rid of the pain for 2 weeks and then it coming back, and the frustration we felt as physical therapists and not being able to really get at the issues, just putting Band-Aids on. And for example, I remember when I was first reading about Donald Ingber and mechanotransduction. This is in the 1980s, after I had met you and after I had felt that contact, that soft touch, and that feeling of energy, resonance. In your first course, just without any preliminary learning, you taught me how to respond to the cranial rhythm, to that life force, and I felt it. And then I started reading about Donald Ingber and mechanotransduction, and he talked about pressure and elongation stimulating through electrons. Now we've shifting from Newton to quantum through electrons and infrared energy, causing a piezoelectric effect, and then the softening of the ground substance, thixotrophy, which is exactly what you were teaching. You talked about melting the ground substance. And I remember how excited I was when I came to you, and you would send me articles and I would send you articles as this science was being discovered and published. It was validating your teaching. What was that like for you?
Well, I didn't need science to teach me. In fact, there's a wonderful quote by Mark Twain. I forget exactly what he said, but it went something like, "It took me years to get over my education." This programming of ours is unbelievable. I'm a very logical person, but I was injured, which brought my intuition back into play. And that was an important.
Talk to us about the injury and what happened in the process of your healing from that injury that got you started on this particular approach that predated
I was an
science.
athlete when I was younger. I played football, I ran track, I threw the shot put, I skied, I drove motorcycles. I got involved in competitive karate, competitive weightlifting. Basically, I love motion, I love competition. And one day I went down to the gym to work out, and I had nobody there to spot me. I was doing squats with somewhere over 300 pounds. But I got to the point where I couldn't get up. I've been a gymnast when I was younger, so I thought I'll just do a back roll to get out of this, forgetting that when you have a 300-pound bar on your hands, it doesn't let go. So I crashed down on the ground with tremendous force, and I herniated my disc at L5, ripped a number of ligaments. And I laid there totally stunned. I couldn't move. I was numb from the waist down. And before I go any further, one of these principles happened then that I didn't have words for then. It seems we have a survival mechanism. So remind me to come back to talk to you about our survival mechanisms.
Okay.
Very important. Anyway, I was numb from the waist down. The purpose of the survival mechanism is to numb us out to help us get through an ordeal that's just too intense. And in fact, it can save our life. Then as the numbness wore off, the pain began. It was horrible. I couldn't move. In that instant, everything I loved, competition, motion, was taken from me. I laugh about it today, but I had to crawl out of the gym. And from that moment on, my life had changed. I tried every form of therapy known to mankind. Nobody wanted to get better more than I did. Nothing but temporary results. It was so frustrating. I had a friend that was a radiologist, and he invited me to a ski house one weekend. But I couldn't ski, and he saw how much pain I was in. So he encouraged me to go see a friend of his that was an orthopedic surgeon. And he suggested I get a spinal fusion. So I did. And that helped. I still hurt a lot and I still couldn't move very well.
So you refused at L5, S1?
Yes. Yeah. So it helped, but not as much as I had hoped for, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So out of total desperation, what I would do is lay on my living room floor. And I'd find these areas in my body that hurt so bad or felt so hard. And I'd push into them. I was still very strong. I was trying to bull my way through.
Mm-hmm.
But my intuitive voice would say, lighten up some more. Take more time. Fortunately, I listened to it. I started to make this remarkable recovery. And so I started to feel, as I was treating myself with the lighter pressure, sensations all over my body. So it's beyond the origin insertion of muscle. So it hit me, I must be dealing with the fascial system. I've been asked to speak in an osteopathic college and TMJ symposiums. So I had access to the library. So I went to the library to see what they knew about fascia. They had a stack of books on fascia, maybe that thick. On top of the stack of books, there was a pile of dust about that thick. I haven't been touched in decades, you know. Dr. Andrew Still, who was the founder of osteopathy, had some really good ideas on the fascial system. And the form of osteopathic myofascial release is what I now call the old form of myofascial release. We can talk about that in just a little bit too. It's more like brute force ramming into the restriction. And unfortunately, that is a lot of pain for something that just doesn't last very long. So somehow my intuition started to click in, and basically I learned to trust it again, and it guided me. And then I started to use these principles with my patients, and all of a sudden everybody's making this remarkable turnaround in their life where before not much was happening, you know, as much as I wanted it to. Yeah.
So you were looking for, in your patients, you were looking for the areas that were hard or hurting,
That's
and
right.
you then use this soft touch,
Right.
sustained release.
Sustain, yes. That's the fine factor is so important, and the proper pressure. So I was sort of guided step by step. It's this beautiful tapestry that's developed over the years. Words came to me, but I had the experience first.
Uh-huh.
I felt on myself, I could trust it, you know.
Uh-huh. And then your staff was guinea pigs too, weren't they?
I didn't hear you.
I said your staff was guinea pigs too. You
Yeah,
started treating your staff, and then they insisted that you start teaching this stuff.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. It turns out that all forms of traditional therapy, mobilization, muscle energy, massage, exercise, on and on and on, it's too quick. There's a number of phenomena that occur that you just touched on a little bit earlier. So with myofascial release, this is an art. It's not a science, really. The science is catching up and describing things. But true myofascial release is an art. When I went to PT school, the first day we learned that physical therapy was an art and a science. From that day on, I never heard the word art again.
Uh-huh.
So, but PT gave me a nice profession. I really enjoyed it for a while, because I realized it wasn't working that well. But anyway, with myofascial release, what I train people to do, we have to learn to quiet our mind so we can feel properly with our proprioceptive senses. We go into the body slowly always, and then we feel where the restricted area is. The old form of myofascial release is pushing through it. That just sets up mental protection and resistance.
That's that osteopathic myofascial release.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, when you become successful, there's a lot of copycat courses popping up. So everybody's calling it myofascial release.
Yeah.
It's forcing a system that can't be forced.
Uh-huh.
It pays no attention to the emotions that are locked into the system,
Right.
the memories that are there that aren't going to be released when somebody forces somebody.
It's treating fascia like tissue rather than a system.
Teach me what?
I said it's treating fascia like tissue. You're working on the tissue rather than the whole system.
Right. Right, exactly. Yeah. So everybody's fascial strain patterns are different. as PTs and other forms of therapists, we're taught protocols, one size fits all.
Right.
And that has nothing to do with the patient on the table. So the art of myofascial release is to feel their restriction. We have close to 8 billion people in our world today. There's 8 billion different fascial strain patterns. So you feel the restriction. This is totally individualistic care. And then you engage it with gentle but firm and sustained pressure. And eventually, as that occurs, a number of phenomena occur. It takes about 90 to 120 seconds for the collagen to even begin to release. And that's just the beginning. And it takes at least another 3 to 5 minutes for a release on a much deeper level that will last. Somewhere around the 5-minute period, there's a number of phenomena that occur that don't occur with traditional therapy because, as I said, it's too quick. So you mentioned piezoelectricity. So as you engage the barrier, just wait enough time. Remember, the phenomenon of piezoelectricity begins to develop. Piezoelectricity is a Greek word for pressure electricity. The cells are crystalline in nature. It's a well-known fact when you put pressure into a crystal, it generates an electrical flow. In our body, it's a bioelectrical flow. This is then coupled with what you just said, the mechanotransduction. What that means is our mechanical pressure stimulates interleukin 8, which is our body's natural anti-inflammatory, and enhances the piezoelectric effect. And then we move into something called phase transition.
Mm-hmm.
The work of Dr. Gerald Pollack comes in very handy here. He's one of the world's leading experts in fluid dynamics.
Right.
Incredible man.
Yeah.
And he's developed, you and I were brought up to believe there's 3 phases of water: ice, water, and vapor. Well, it turns out there's a 4th phase. And Dr. Pollack has discovered this. So when we move through mechanotransduction, we move into what's called phase transition. On phase transition, that which is solidified in your body, like ice, is transformed into fluid again. Because when we go through trauma, physical or emotional, the fascial system begins to become more and more viscous, to the point where it becomes almost like crushing pressure on pain-sensitive nerves and blood vessels, joints. It can generate tensile strengths of up to close to 2,000 pounds per square inch. And none of this shows up in any of the standard testing that's being done. Very few physicians or therapists were trained to even recognize it and understand its importance. So during phase transition, we go into therapeutic chaos. Now that's another bad word in healthcare. It's all about order. This has to do with systems theory, which states we can only grow and heal in a chaotic situation. Because we have a mind, it always reorganizes at a higher level. So this sort of roller coaster ride we take, it's incredible. And eventually we move into what's called resonance. When you and I touch another human being, our vibratory rates are quite different than another human being. But as long as we're not forcing the system, what begins to occur is the energy now that had become so viscous and solidified starts to rehydrate. And now this crushing pressure starts to lessen over pain-sensitive structures. And that's when authentic healing commences.
Yeah, you said that it's like it's dammed up because it's a flow of information through the fascia, the living, vibrating crystal web. And it's a flow of information, or you call it the mind is flowing, but these restrictions are like dams that block information so that the cells can't talk to one another and homeostasis is interrupted.
Exactly. You sound like you know what you're talking about.
I've been listening to you. And also some other scientists who seem to know what they're talking about too, really confirming your work. I remember how excited I was when Paul Stanley spoke in Vancouver about sustaining the compression and getting the interleukin effect. And Richard Hardy and I picked up on that right away, and you did too. We sent it to you and you said, yes, this This is exactly what we're talking about. Healing can't happen quickly. It happens over time. And we were taught very quick fixes.
Right.
And of course, the pharmaceutical industry has really incorporated that quick fix idea. Everybody wants a quick fix and wants to be fixed.
That's right. Yeah.
But John, you talk about the healing endeavor as being a relationship between the therapist and the patient. And that one of the most important principles that you ask us to believe is if you know what you're going to do before you go in the room, you don't know what you're doing.
Right. Exactly. So protocols, we're all taught to follow the protocols.
Yeah.
And do the person on the table. We'll talk about centering in just a little bit because I teach all the therapists and physicians I train to learn how to center themselves. So that when you touch another person, you go in like a curious cat. Now you can start with symptoms, that's obvious to everybody, but you start to read the body. You analyze tissue texture. Is it hard, or tender? Does it move? It's a glide system. If you look at Dr. Gambarteau's work, which I know you're very familiar with, all his information shows you it's a glide system.
Glide system.
But when that viscosity of the ground substance gets to a point where the tissue can't glide anymore, that's what we call restrictions. You feel that where it stops,
Right.
And then the feeling of a release is kind of like butter melting or taffy stretching. You don't slide on the surface, that's massage, but you then take the slack out again until you hit another restriction. Most of us have multiple barriers or restrictions. So the time factor, the proper pressure, and then the therapist being centered is key. If the therapist isn't centered, and most aren't, they're coming from the Channel 5 intellectual side, the patient's subconscious picks that up and they go into protection as much as the therapist wants to help them.
And it's important for patients to be open and feel safe. Exactly. And that's that resonance. And you and I remember talked at one point where 60 to 90 seconds, your hands are placed, and then all of a sudden you start to feel that dipping. It's like the body invites you to dip down into it. It's very subtle, but you dip down into it. And you said, I feel like that's when resonance is established, that energetic link between the energy of the therapist and the patient. And that's when the real release begins to happen.
That's exactly correct. Yeah. So that some schools teach 5 grams of pressure or heavy pressure. And that the art of it is, as you said, you feel the mind. And the mind is very dynamic. And as you quiet yourself down, you can feel this. Anybody can learn this. But Channel 5 is so busy talking and thinking, it completely misses all the information that's bombarding them. So like you're saying, that when you're releasing somebody, it's like a magnet pulling you in. At times it pushes you away. And you sort of ride the wave with them, but continue to engage the barrier for a sufficient amount of time.
Right. I love the image of the curious cat. To let go of the outcome and just be present. That was a gift that you gave me, that you give all of us, but I certainly picked up on it when I was doing my skill enhancement with you, when I was treating patients with you for a week. And until that point, I'd been 20 years as a clinician, a practicing physical therapist, going by the protocols and reading the research and doing what the research told me. And then all of a sudden I was given this permission to do something very different that felt right, but was very intellectually threatening to me. And you and I talked about this. Out on a rock in Oak Creek one day in 1993. And you encouraged me to not be afraid, because to live my life worried about what other people were going to think of me was not to live a life at all. And you encouraged me to start writing down these ideas that I had. And I knew that I had to somehow know more about quantum theory. I hadn't put it together yet, that what you were doing was shifting us, not forgetting Newton altogether, but expanding our understanding of Newton into quantum and reflecting on the idea of letting the energy do the work rather than force.
Right, right. You can't separate quantum from Newtonian physics. We tried to do that. I mean, traditionally, it can't happen, you know.
Yeah, they're all it's depends on what you're looking at as to what's predominant.
That's right. Yeah.
Both are working at the same time.
Yeah.
So this recent fall, last October, an attack on your body almost took your life one more time. You've had a couple of times where you were bitten by a brown recluse spider and also scorpion, and you almost lost your life with that.
Yeah.
And now once more with this, and of course your trauma as a young man was a life-threatening kind of trauma. You said you've experienced near death more than once in your lifetime. From your heart, what wisdom have you been able to take from the near-death experiences that you've had?
Well, as you said, bugs like me.
Bugs like you.
The brown recluse spider almost kill me. Creates this horrible bullseye in your leg. I'll get into the details if you want, but just to skim over it now. I became almost delirious. The Poison Control Center was called by my son Brian, and they said there's nothing you can do about it. Your father will probably die. There's no antidote. And they said if you have trouble breathing, come into the emergency room. We'll try to help you. But that was a very positive message. But I think my ability to have access to tremendous energy, it saved my life. But I was really out of it for a couple of days, shaking violently and horrible pain and on and on and on. But I had patients come in to see me from all over the world that Monday. I just couldn't let them down. So somehow I could hardly stand up. I took a shower, I was holding onto the walls. I went in and I told my staff, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. I said, but just let them know I've been injured and, I'll do the best I can. I could barely sit, so I'm sitting on a chair doing some technique sitting. And my intuition said, pull your energy back to your spine. So I did that. Then it said, pull your energy to the back of your spine. When I did that, this tremendous force went through me. And the patients flew off the table from the energetic charge they were getting. At the end of the day, they all said, that's the best treatment I ever had. So I teach a lot of that in centering and with the different seminars. There is an energy. See, healthcare doesn't want to talk about energy either,
Right. That's quantum.
Yeah. And I give a lot of silly examples in the seminars, but just to make a point, imagine you have a toaster that isn't warming the bread. Well, massage therapists are rubbing the cover. People teaching chiropractors are in there messing around with the joints, Everyone wants to know what your mother had to do with it. And what I'm saying is, have you thought about plugging
the toaster in?
See, this is what myofascial gets to the very core of your existence. There's an energy to it. That's the essence that we talk about, the luminescent mist that I read about in this book so many years ago, So as you tap into that, it not only makes you a more effective therapist or human being or healthier, but also helps you to save your life. It's what it did for me. And when I was in the hospital after this recent fall, my kidneys had shut down. I was on dialysis for a couple of months. Unfortunately, the physicians that were taking care of me in the dialysis unit were shocked because they said, you're the second person we've ever had in all the years we've been treating people that came off of dialysis. So I think MFR saved my kidneys and its function, and it saved my life. Because I went totally out when I was getting dialysis one day, and I just remember his voice saying, John, are you there? Are you there? Can you hear me? It was like far, far away.
Mm-hmm.
I've struggled to come back. It took quite a while for me to come back and get really fully conscious again.
So you were out of your body.
Oh yeah.
Were you connected to any vision, or do you
Well,
remember anything about it?
I've been out of my body for so long. I teach people to go out of their body, so that the key is to be out of your body and in your body at whole times. Then you're fully present, fully clear, and fully powerful, and in touch with your wisdom. The first month after that happened, I was mentally out there. I mean, it was really bizarre. And so I'm back now 95% mentally. I tell the class when I'm doing a class right now that I might forget a word once in a while, but I'll just make it up and we'll flow by it,
There's nothing new about that.
But what it did, all these near-death experiences, was really reinforce the life principles with myofascial release I've been teaching for decades now. Just made them stronger. I'm having more clarity than ever, and still struggling physically. It's really hard work, but I'm getting there. Just
So you're
frustrating.
healing. Mhm. Before we go, can you talk to us a little bit about unwinding? There's a lot of controversy right now about the concept of unwinding, and there is what I call a kind of a movement in what's called somatic movement, a kind of guided movement where a therapist suggests that you move in certain ways, that kind of came out of self-care, really, over Zoom, because we couldn't touch and be with people. And so I think the concept of unwinding that you teach has been distorted somewhat. It's not the way I recognize the inner experience. So could you tell us a little bit about how you teach about unwinding, what it is, and how it's meant to be a healing process?
I think unwinding is a natural phenomenon that started eons ago. And in our society, whether we realize it or not, we were told to never let go of control, as if it was some form of a bad thing. The only time most of us ever let go of control is when we're so exhausted we finally fall asleep. And you go into the dream state. That's unwinding. There's nothing weird about it. You do it every night because your body is educating itself. It's releasing things. You flush around, you dream, you drool, you cry. The problem is there's something I call positions in space of past trauma. I'll get back to that in a moment. So the body is self-correcting through the subconscious. What you just mentioned about how they move and tell you how to move, that's conscious motion. That's voluntary motion. That's channel 5.
Right.
It's good. But again, healing occurs not in channel 5, not being moved by somebody or you're consciously moving. It's when you open up, you learn to quiet yourself down, and this beautiful subconscious motion begins to occur. Your body starts to move spontaneously. It comes back to what I've discovered is there's something called state-dependent memory, learning, and behavior from psychological parlance. Well, I found that has a missing link too, and the missing link is a position in space. When you think about it, when we're traumatized, we're in a position in space. Well, the examples I give is, say you're walking across the street and you hear a car coming at you. You turn toward the car and you brace against it. At that moment of position in space, your energy leaves your body. This comes back to the survival mechanism. Let me get back to that. You get hit in this position. Your body numbs out and leaves. That's what happened to me in the weightlifting accident. It's emotion. I fall to the ground. There's another position in space of past trauma. Then the damn car runs over me. There's a big. So these somehow are embedded in our energy field. And so with unwinding, it's all about trust. This is why it's so important the therapist be centered. If the patient feels trust enough to take control of it, they start to spontaneously move. We're meant to do that. And somehow your subconscious knows exactly what you need. It's incredible. So as it moves us into these positions in space, we hit something called a still point. It's like suspended animation. They're moving and all of a sudden everything stops. During that position in space, your body may tremor. The trapped energy that got locked into you from the trauma starts to move through you and shake you a bit. Emotions may come up, all sorts of memories may come flooding forth that were not available to your conscious mind. There's other possibility where you get into what I call the freeze response, total tension, the deer in the headlight kind of look.
Uh-huh.
We have two basic ways of dealing with pain, trauma in our life. You either leave your body, still point, or you go into total tension, the deer in the headlight kind of total contraction and fear.
Mhm.
You get locked into that state. Of the many things that happen to you at that moment of trauma, your sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system then is kicked in, and you're locked into one state or the other. It's the most unhealthy thing in the world. You're like the person that drank 10 cups of coffee. You can't sit still. You can't stop talking. You're agitated. You're hurting. You're not sleeping well. Or the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
No energy at all.
Mhm.
So what myofascial release does as you go through this process, somehow our mind body resets itself. And as you said, moves back into homeostasis. Now you have adaptability again and can respond to the moment the way you're meant to. Makes all the difference in the world. So it's
The
been
consciousness, the healing consciousness can flow through again,
exactly
where we kept it trapped in that fear response, that reactive response. Is that right?
that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
So state-dependent memory learning behavior and positional dependent memory learning behavior, it creates what was called a flashback experience. You've all had this experience. Let's say you're walking down the street and you pass a bakery. You smell cookies being baked. And all the memories of your mother baking of chocolate chip cookies, the taste of the cookie comes through instantaneously.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're sitting in a car, the light and your radio's on, and all of a sudden your song comes on. Now that's good or bad. All of a sudden, all those memories, all those emotions come flooding through you.
Yeah.
So that's tissue memory. That's what comes up with it. It's trapped in there, but it's no longer available to the conscious mind. So going into this leads us into what I call our survival mechanism. You and I, as a human being, and every animal in the universe has this survival mechanism. But again, because it has to do with your mind, it's been completely ignored in healthcare. I mean, how you can ignore the mind is mind-boggling to me. I've looked at the story for a long time too. But so when things get too intense for us, too painful or too scary, somehow this energy system of ours leaves our body to some degree. Like with my weightlifting accident, it numbs you out to help you get through the ordeal and or it saves your life. Pretty important stuff. But what I've seen is that nature wants us to learn from our experiences. So this is a fragmented learning. This then turns into what I call the broken record effect. So if you're hit by a car, and it's a fragmented experience, on the subconscious level, that car's hitting you and hitting you and hitting you like a broken record, day and night. So internally, you're bracing against this pain or fear all night long, all day long. And that constant state of inner tension creates solidification of the ground substance of the fascia and turns into massive problems health-wise for us. And something called dis-ease. If you open up that word, dis-ease, lack of ease,
Mm-hmm.
what are we talking about? The mind gets blocked. It can't go down and to the cellular level so they can function the way they're designed to. So it's about time we start to pay attention to that stuff.
What are you proudest of in your life?
That's a good question. I guess that I've been able to learn from my pain and then be able to transfer that information to my patients and to other therapists and physicians. It's grown so exponentially. I've fortunately been able to train over 100,000 therapists and physicians now. And I think myofascial release is probably being used on millions of people a day, not a day, but maybe a month. And it's spreading like wildfire. It's really the healthcare of the future. We will always need good doctors. We always need medication at times. Unless you've had horrible, crushing trauma, life-threatening trauma, the thing you need is myofascial release as quickly as possible. And I think it really is going to be something that's to develop into that. So I hope that's where we go. Well, I'm teaching a healing seminar right now. And this is for people with no background at all in therapy or medicine.
The healing seminar.
Healing seminar.
Mhm.
Also for therapists and physicians. We have 3 or 4 physicians in the group right now. They're doing great. You know, physicians are really opening up to this also. But the results are obvious to everybody. You don't have to convince anybody of myofascial release when it's done properly. It speaks for itself. The patient look at you in awe afterwards and say, that was what I've been waiting for in my whole life.
Mhm.
Very instinctive, it's very intuitive.
And some of the distortions that I see of your work is that they don't hold long enough at the barrier. They feel something happening in 90 seconds and say, oh boy, I'm getting really good at this.
Yeah. Well, see, traditional therapy is what I call fool's gold. So when you don't hold long enough, or you use too much pressure, that kind of stuff, and we do a little of that, that's okay, but you don't need that much. But the pressures are too light, you never engage the barrier properly.
Right, the soft
And
tissue
most of them,
response.
nobody's
Right.
spending enough time, like you said, sustained pressure,
Mhm.
so that the results just don't last, you know. Mhm.
That's what's unique about your approach. And is there anything else that you wish that I would have asked that I didn't ask?
No, I did hear her. Thank you.
Are you getting coached from the peanut gallery?
Yeah. That is helping me. You've been very thorough. You always are. I'm so glad I met you. You've inspired so many people.
Well, right back at you, John. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I really appreciate your showing up. Let me share my screen.
And that's how it ends for me, the recording I have. So Carol, if you have anything beyond that.
I was going to share my screen of his books, Healing Ancient Wounds, and then the textbook that you can get on his website. But I hit the stop record button instead of unshare screen. So that's my technology issue.
Carol, what a lovely, lovely interview. There are so many people here today. I think we're going to really have to use the raise hands function for those of you who want to comment. We invite you to turn your video cameras back on if you like. But there are just so many people that if you can use the raise hands function, which might be in your Zoom frame under more on the right, or it might be under reactions, depending on which version you've got. And then it comes up in order on our screens, so we can be very, I don't know, we can be very polite and orderly. May, you want to unmute? I'm hoping you guys can unmute yourselves. Hi, May. It's great.
Hi, how are you?
I may. And can I add a quick caveat here, please, Susan?
Oh, please.
And everybody, I'm going to be, if you have questions about John's work, I will try to answer them from my perspective. But please, once more, I want to say, I am not John Barnes. You've heard him. You've heard how he expresses himself. You've heard his experience. And I can only offer you what I've heard, what my perception is of what I've heard him say. Somebody asked about Channel 3 and Channel 5. What's the significance of that? I remember asking him that once, and his response to me was, oh, I don't know. I just came up with that one day. He may have a much more precise answer, but that's the answer that my perception would give you. That's just an example. But May, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, hi Carol, how are you?
Good to see you.
Thank you. the thing with unwinding, I feel like I always had a hard time with that. And I'm just talking about myself. So that way I transmit that to my patients, of course. But he always he just said let your body move the way that it wants to move. And since I've been a dancer my whole life, I started dancing. And then I was stopped over and over because they were like, no, you're dancing. I'm like, yeah, but that's the way my body moves. And I was so confused about that because he used an example of someone up on the table on the, an example of someone who volunteered, and she had been a gymnast, and she ended up in this upside gymnastic position. And he's like, see, that's from when she was a gymnast. So it really shut me down to want to do unwinding, because I'm like, I guess I'm not doing it right. So I don't know where to go with that, because when I start to unwind, I dance. And I was like that. I have another question after that too. Can I?
From what I understood John to say was, what comes through when you allow it in a true unwinding is your own mind.
Mm-hmm.
You have the mind of a dancer. So why wouldn't it be dancing?
That's what I said, but when I did it in the seminars, I was always stopped.
Well, sometimes we get stopped in seminars when the people who are guiding unwinding experience see us going over a repetition over and over and over again, and they'd like us to break out of that into something else because they think they perceive we're stuck.
Mm-hmm.
But John will be the first to say, I think, nobody can unwind anybody. You are doing your own unwinding. The role of the helper is to keep you safe and to keep gravity out of the system as much as possible, but to allow your own expression to come through.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just erase that memory.
Thank you.
And go with your inner experience.
Great. So I think the other question, thank you so much. You know what? I'm going to do that. I do have one other question I think is also more applicable to us as health practitioners, which is, and again, this is me, and I'm like, okay, now I understand it from differently. I've just been through a really bad bout of back pain and neck pain, and I'm doing all my myofascial and getting body work a lot, and I'm doing working, and it's I found out that it's probably a strong reaction to osteoporosis medication, which I read about more inflames things in the body. So I'm like, okay, I'm just sort of like, we have to think about what else is going on, not just in the musculoskeletal system, but in the whole system, all the systems of the body. So I guess I don't really know what to say about that. It's sort of like, I didn't experience this, like that pain is coming from another system's problems. Does that make sense?
Well, sometimes the thing that we take to get better is worse than the thing that we took it for.
Oh yeah.
and pharmacology has many side effects, as you know. I would just do a deep dive into the current literature on controlling and treating osteoporosis, and really be very careful and look around for different points of view about how to treat it, rather than going just with one. But that's not my field. It's not your field. We were not trained in chemistry. Fortunately, I have a twin sister who's a nurse practitioner who is in women's health, and she knows a lot about that, and she can guide me. And sometimes if somebody texts me and a question like that, like she's sitting over here right now, I said, do you want to comment? And she said, no. Do your own homework.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Magdalena, yes.
Hello, Carol. Thank you so much for doing that interview. First of all, it was so lovely to see John, and even the chemistry between you two. You don't have to study chemistry to know that was a special interview. I have the book that you wanted to show.
Yes, right. It is.
So that's one of the books that Carol wanted to show, that is written by John. It's an amazing book. It's on his website.
That's his life story and how he got into this work, and And so for the other book is his textbook that he uses for classes.
Yeah. Another thing that I have is your book.
Well, that's nice.
Which is really amazing too. If anyone's interested in Carol's books, they're amazing. And
there's an excellent chapter by John Barnes in that book on myofascial release. So thank you, Magdalena.
Yeah. And I just found it really interesting what you had mentioned about the difference between somatic movement, the classes that are coming up, and unwinding. And I find it just so interesting that somatic, just like John said, it's really great to go through those motions and to be guided. Sometimes that brings people into positions that they're not comfortable in, but there is definitely something extra special about the John Barnes version of what unwinding is and how that gets us back into our bodies.
Right.
And
it's that inner expression of the mind that's not distorted by the need for control or the need to intellectually guide it or be in control or understand it. It's just allowing the mind to express itself in movement, and you get into positions of memory from the trauma, and then there's some sort of reorganization that takes place where they're able to, and that very often the eyelids will flutter, and then they move out of it, and and sometimes it's accompanied by sound effects. I mean, sometimes you hear pops and then people will talk later about, I just was back in that automobile accident. I was in that rollover or whatever. And sometimes they actually, even stranger than that, an odor will be emitted from the tissue that's been stuck in the tissue, a chloroform odor or an odor that's associated with that which was just released is very palpable to everybody or smellable to everybody in the room. You can't deny it. And that to me is part of getting out of woo-woo. You know, when you got that reality check, it's not just imagination.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much for doing that interview. My question is about the unwinding. So I'm very familiar with kind of moving through unwinding into past traumas. And then I was at that healing seminar, I believe, if you guys did this filming about a month ago in Sedona, beautiful spot. And then the healing seminar right after, we did subtle energy, which is another course that's part of the options that we can take as John Barnes therapists. And I just planted this seed of sending energy into the future. And then I started thinking in this moment about unwinding into the future. And what are your thoughts on that? And that could be a John question or a question for you as well.
Well, that's a very interesting question, isn't it? It's one of the things that of the many things I don't understand about quantum physics, is that time is relative. It's all together. The past, present, future is all together.
Yeah.
But where it's powerful, where that translates for me in a powerful, everyday, meaningful sense, is that I know that I can do what we call segment intend. That I can intend in my mind before I move into a process, before I move in with a patient. I can intend in my mind, clear my consciousness, center myself, as John says, and clear my mind of all expectation or outcome. What I intend then is that the greatest good would come to this person in this moment, in the future. I'm about to step into that future. So my intention is in this moment guided toward being open and attending and intending in such a way that my energy and the patient's energy working together can come up with a response that is beneficial. So that's how I think about future in terms of energy. I'm very compelled by precognition kind of studies. I'm very compelled by ideas that we are so closed off in our minds and our thoughts that we can't understand how people can be outside the box. And in those kinds of ways. But that's all that I'm willing to comment on. I can take that to John, see what he would have to say about that. And what is your question specifically about unwinding?
Yeah, so being familiar with unwinding past traumas to free up my system and help my patients free up their system from the past.
Plus,
and just the curiosity of, can we clear the path for the future somehow? And
well, I think that's what
getting into channel 5, channel 3, really the future is now.
Yeah.
And it's also
that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing in the moment when we're unwinding. Yeah. We're clearing the path for the future. Right.
Yeah.
People say their lives are changed.
Yeah.
You know, that's what patients say to us. Yeah. And that's future. That's moving now from here on out. That was then, this is now.
Yeah, I love it. So I feel like we're kind of really merging channel 5 with channel 3. It's like we're having these thoughts and these intentions, but we're just continuously coming back to, well,
right,
all is well right now.
As John said, you don't throw away channel 5. I mean, you use it. You use your intellect. Recognize past patterns. You understand symptoms. You do postural analysis. That's all channel 5. Yeah. But when you actually start the treatment, you center and gently move into the energy field. As John says, patients can feel us before we come in the room. Move into the energy field in a curious cat kind of way, and let all of that go and just be in the moment, attending and intending in the moment for good to come. Yeah.
I love that curious cat analogy. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for hosting. And I'm sticking around for Biotensegrity, but I feel like it's probably somebody else's turn. Thank you.
Thank you. And Janet is up, I think. Did you have a question, Janet?
I do. Hi, Carol. You look terrific, first of all. And it was really an honor to sit in on this conversation between two old friends and to hear some of your observations while you were talking to John. As you know, you were part of my unwinding time and my first immersion, and and I've now been doing MFR for 5 years, and I am the person I was before I started getting injured. And that's the best part about it is I can attest to all of this that you talk about. And the science is so beautiful because I know I pick up people's energies. I feel you, and all of my therapists, I feel and I can pick up emotional things. And so I realize that, hearing John talk about how the science connects in, it makes us appreciate just how amazing we are as beings, how huge we really are, and how to translate into daily life is always the challenge. And it's interesting for me, as you know, I teach mediation in a law school, and I teach people who are living in a very left brain channel 5 world. And I have introduced the concepts of channel 3 to them, and they totally eat it up. And it's interesting watching how they soften into it in the way our bodies soften into the healing. So I'm waiting to see the Nobel Prize for all of you. I know you all deserve it.
Janet, can I ask you to tell us how you came from teaching law to finding myofascial release?
It's called pain. I injured my right leg from the time I was very young. And I knew that I was like 3 years old. I got my foot caught into the back of a tricycle, and it was not diagnosed well. And over the years, I injured it again and again in different ways and tried every form of medication you can imagine. I started the traditional way with, orthopedics, surgeons and things like that. But they never could figure out what was going on. I had a lot of pain and they never could diagnose it. And at one point, somebody suggested some form of surgery. And what he said to me in a very cocky way was, I can do this surgery for you. There's a 50-50 chance of success. And if worse comes to worse, I'll just cut the nerve. And that didn't sound right to me. So I said, thank you very much. Have a good day. And I started looking into more, homeopathic types of healing. And I did everything: acupuncture, chiropractic, every kind of healing ceremony you can imagine. And I was doing physical therapy with a traditional therapist. And I'm fast forwarding. It's now 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And part of my problem was an incredibly painful toe. And this gentleman decided in his wisdom to kind of walk up on me while I was sitting quietly on the bed waiting for the whole therapy to start. And he yanked my toe. And I was lightning. It was very intense. And I jumped off the table, and it took about 6 weeks for it to quiet down. And I had tried every therapist in that practice except for one. And there was one more to go. And it was a woman. I thought, okay, I'll try the girl. Let's see what goes on. And she said, and I told her the story. And I said, I don't trust anybody right now.
Backstory on that.
And what she said was, what I do is very different. It's soft and it won't hurt you. And at worst, it won't do anything, but at least it won't hurt you. And after 30 years of being hurt, even by well-intentioned people, it sounded good to me. And her name was Cynthia Gonzalez. And Cynthia was telling me a little bit, I like credentials. I am a little bit left-brained here. And she was telling me that she taught at the University of Miami in the physical therapy department. And I said, oh, do you know Carol Davis? And she says, well, I teach the course that Carol used to teach. So I thought, I trust that. And it's interesting. Everything in my journey in MFR has been started because I trusted Carol to begin with. I went into an immersion with Carol and Craig and Tara that was mind-blowing. I mean, seriously mind-blowing. And this summer, I could barely move. I had a terrible attack of sciatica. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And the first week, they drugged me up, and so I was groggy and in pain. And then they took me to this fabulous rehab hospital, and they did everything. They gave me this whole team approach and everything. And the interest in physical therapy and occupational therapy and just wisdom. I mean, they took me off of all the garbage and simplified my medications. But the one thing that was seriously missing the entire time was the MFR. And since I've gotten back to it in the last couple of months, all of a sudden, I'm healed again. So it's like, I see it in John, and Carol, I see it in you, So hallelujah, I'm a believer.
Thank you, Janet.
That's sorry it took so long, but
Thank you so much. I love healing stories.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any other hands up, but I didn't know if Steve Levin had anything he wanted to add in. I don't know if he's still, Steve, are you still on?
Only to congratulate Carol on the wonderful interview. John thinks a lot deeper than I do. I think in just very simple, straightforward things. And I'm sort of more the science, and I do very little now in the way of treatment. I'm more interested in the underlying science of it all. So it's always nice to hear treatment every once in a while and get me back to really where I started, which was as a clinician.
Right.
So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. We don't have any other questions up in the, no more hands up in the chat. But Carol, I'm wondering, watching this, if you've now thought, oh, I should have asked him, I should have asked him, I should have asked him.
Yeah. I would have loved to have talked a little bit more about the fact that the framework within which he was teaching his principles was that of holism. There was no question about that. But then, as I understood biotensegrity, that was in 1989, and then quantum in the 1990s. And then in 2015, I went to my first biotensegrity meeting at your invitation. Actually, you invited John, and John said, I can't go. Will you go and teach them my approach? And so we were given 10 minutes to talk about our approaches. And that's
seven minutes. Everybody, I had to tell all these people, all these amazing people, you've got 7 minutes.
We were all the presentations were marvelous. And then Steve would talk about how that biotensegrity strengthens that perspective and informs that perspective. And I was enlarged and deepened in such a wonderful way that I wanted to know more about biotensegrity, and I got involved with Chris Clancy and the Embodied Biotensegrity Group and the Tea Party, and you, Susan, and reading your books and I wish I would have talked to John about the tension and compression piece that he was talking about. He was talking about compression and tension, compression and elongation. And he talks about the restrictions, how they feel different, the stiffness and versus compliance of the extracellular matrix, how that translates out into that biotensegrity kind of model of fascia being the most efficient that it can in any one moment, distributing this energy, this tension and compression combination of these forces. And I'd love for him to talk a little bit more about that, to see if he relates to that, how he relates to that. He did say he understood biotensegrity from the geodesic dome the way that Steve understood it when he saw Kenneth Nelson's sculpture. So the same image came to him. This is the way we're put together. And then how you translate that into his principles. But I think that you could see how his principles are very much consistent with and reinforced with the understanding of biotensegrity, the physiology and the architecture of biotensegrity. But he didn't speak to that specifically. Be interesting to see what he had to say. Brad, did you have a question?
Dr. Fullerton, hold on, let's see. Asked to unmute. There we go.
Hey, howdy.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was great. So great to be back with everybody. It's been months since I've.
Isn't it great? Yeah.
Yeah. And Carol, that was great. It's
Thank you, Brad.
The long-term friendship aspect to it. You can feel that. So I was just at Ann and Chris Frederick's place. Y'all know them, Stretch to Win.
Of course.
With David Lasondak and Paul Mettler. Does anybody know Paul Mettler? He has a thing called dermal fascial restoration.
New to me.
New. Nobody. So he works with stretching and addressing restrictions in the dermis and basically outside of the deep fascia. So superficial fascia and dermis. And he does bidirectional stretching with little thumb cots, like the little rubber things.
Finger puzzle.
Yeah, and then he palpates just the skin and soft tissue superficial to the deep fascia, and only works on that. And it's fascinating. So I was looking at skin with ultrasound as he was doing one of these stretches. So he's stretching like this, and he's like, it's not compression. It's like you're sort of grabbing and suspending the dermis, and so you have to have these sticky things on your thumb in order to do that.
Uh-huh.
I do know who you're talking about.
Yeah, he's from
puts those
Chicago.
little pots.
Yeah.
Finger
on
cots. Yeah.
fingertips.
Yeah. It's the Chinese finger puzzle.
No, those little
They're like what we used for voting during the pandemic, where you could sign your name, you roll it like a little condom for your finger.
Yeah.
Oh, finger cots. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So so what was fascinating was you could see the stretch. So basically he's stretching in this direction, and I'm looking with the probe like this in between.
Ultrasound.
And it was thixotropic, right? Is the dermis would thicken as he would pull along the line of stress that he was pulling on, the dermis would thicken. And then the fascinating one was he was at the skin over the upper trapezius. And I always see changes on ultrasound in the trapezius muscle overlying the scapula, where it looks like there's tears in the deep part of that muscle. It just collapses when you compress it with ultrasound in that region. And I do treat it with injections. And but after he stretched the skin above that, the muscle looked normal overlying the scapula. And all he did was stretch.
David Lasondak has a really good podcast. Well, generally speaking, but also one with this gentleman. What's his name again?
Oh,
Brad?
Paul Metler. Yeah, that's on my list. I didn't even know
Yes.
David was going to be at this meeting. I was going to do ultrasound to look at what was happening with this guy's therapy. And then David was attending too. So,
so to me, it's really interesting how all these, so many different people here today, right, have these different backgrounds. Sean Beakey's done Amatsu, and, Steve Levin learned from John Manel, and all the, we've got Stephen Schafferman and Stacey Barrows, and probably many others who have been trained under, in Feldenkrais method. How all of these soft, gentle, listening, connected approaches create these kind of dynamical, right?
Yeah.
Almost instant kind of transformations, what Steve calls the dynamical diseases.
Dynamical disease, yeah.
Would you say, Steve?
Exactly. It's all part of this dynamical disease concept that the pathologist and standard medicine thinks of tissue damage and things broken, torn, ruptured, and dynamical diseases thinks of the structures, how it moves, and the dynamics of the system rather than the injury to the system. So these are what primarily manual therapists and people, most of you treat the dynamics of the system, dynamical diseases, and ignore the pathology, which is often good. They ignore it because the pathology what we perceive as the pathology may not really be the problem. It may be just the dynamics.
Steve, do you have any comment on what John said about in systems theory, change only occurs or starts to occur during chaos?
I'm not sure about that, but it's an interesting thought. But yeah, well, systems theory is a bit deeper than that in a lot of ways. But I see his point.
Yeah, I guess it's like a phase change.
Yes,
part of what he's saying is
right.
like suddenly everything changes and it
Right.
seems chaotic. And
Yeah, well, I think that most of the things in the body are biphasic, and you either have one or the other, and things will suddenly change. And those releases you get are part of this biphasic reaction of things that happen. That is either, it's either left or right. It's never, it gets in the middle, it gets confusing
Yeah.
and changes very rapidly. This thing about the skin that you talked about, of course, he thinks he's only working on the skin, but of course, anything he touches on the skin goes all the way down deeper to the nuclei of the cells.
He would
way
agree with
down
that.
deeper.
He would agree with that.
Yeah.
That's why we're so excited to see the changes much deeper under the skin.
Yeah, as John Manel used to say, although we think we're doing different things, if we're no matter what we say we're doing, if we're getting the same results, we're really doing the same thing. So that the technique may be separate from the results, and different techniques work for different things and different people. So I think that John Barnes's technique has a deep reaction in these dynamical diseases. So it's always been John and I have always bounced back and forth on this together, and so I know that he's doing it. I don't always agree with his explanation for why he's doing it, because these are perceptions that we haven't been able to prove. But it's as good a way as any. If you don't have these guesses, you never find out what the real reason is.
So, Brad, tell us more about that meeting.
Oh, well, it was fascinating. I was the only physician there, so it was, everyone else was a manual therapist, and so I was playing catch up with, what are you feeling again? Because it's interesting, the global assessment of a region, and I was beginning to get the feel for it. But he talked a lot about the viscoelastic quality as you're kind of doing a global stretch on the skin in multiple directions. And then eventually you get to oh, wait, that one's, and then you focus in and do a little sustained stretch on it. And it was real hard on my thumbs. My technique wasn't great, and I have degenerative arthritis. And so it was like, it would be nice to have more conditioned hands being a manual therapist. But it was challenging to me, because what I do is, for those of you who don't know, is injection to stimulate repair. So prolotherapy, PRP, and it's focused on the fascial structure. So it's biotensegrity based application of that. And there are lots of injuries, fascial injuries, that are, I always say, are in between where we recognize disease, scapular muscle injuries, and everybody looks at the rotator cuff impingement when there's actually strains in those muscles, that are more towards the base of how we move our arm. But I'm sorry.
This is an automated call from Bell Canada. Your network protection has been.
That was interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what to me, I learn most when I'm challenged with the way I think through things already, right? So when I see this muscle and I go, man, that just collapses as I push on it with a probe, and it's the deep layer of the muscle, and it's like, it's got to be torn, right? It looks like it's torn. And then I have a colleague who focuses on nerve hydrodissection, and he said, oh, I've looked in that area, and what I do is I hydrodissect the branches of the spinal accessory nerve deep to the trapezius, and I get results doing that. Whereas I'm needling and dextrosing or PRPing the muscle itself in that layer that looks torn. And now I'm seeing, if you stretch the skin away from where that tear is, then it suddenly looks like normal muscle. So it's fluid dynamics is the key, and those rapid changes are what's so fascinating. And none of us have the whole picture, right? But it does all fit into a biotensegrity model. It's just everything's coming at it from different areas. And so then clinically, how do you apply that? When do you step in with what intervention? And to me, it's fascinating to hear John Barnes' experience of how he intuited his way to the solution, just feeling, right? And the time component of it. And because I'm always telling people, it's like the steroids will give you quick relief for a couple of weeks, and in the end, it'll degenerate your tissue more. Whereas if you do something like PRP and get a repair response, then you won't notice the change until 6 to 8 weeks later. Then you start realizing, wait, something changed.
Brad, one more question. You said that then you do this stretch and then you're sustaining that stretch for how long?
That's a great question. And that's where next time I talk to Paul, I'm going to talk to him more of that. It's closer to the 60 to 90 to 120 seconds just from observing what he was doing. So he may be reaching that first change, and his technique may be improved by learning from MFR, right?
Yeah, because Carol, I was very interested in this 5 minutes thing. I mean, how many people sit there with their hands there for actually for 5 minutes? That is not how most of us roll, right?
Anyone who does this well, who centers, listens through not just their hands, their whole bodies, listens to how fascia is responding in every second to what's happening under and between my hands and through the whole system. And you're focused on listening and communicating energetically with this tissue that's changing as a result of what you're doing, and you're picking it up. You're in conversation. Is it difficult to be in conversation for 5 minutes with somebody? Sometimes if you have an agenda, or if you're pushing your point too hard or whatever, but if you are in true energetic communication, as Barnes teaches it, the 5 minutes goes, and you're not looking at the clock. You're feeling for change for as long as it feels as if the fascia is responding in that particular moment. And then you'll you'll be still for a while, and you'll think, maybe this is it. And I wonder what's going on up under that shoulder blade. And then it starts up again. Oh, not finished here yet. So you're in constant energetic communication with this fascial system, this whole person's fascial system, and the whole person, him or herself, so that by the time is up, it's almost, you wonder where the time went when you're doing this well. That doesn't come easy to people who've been schooled in protocols and logic. And that's the art. And that's why John insists, one of the reasons why John insists early on, even after you've just taken one course, come treat patients with him, either in Sedona or at his clinic in Sedona or in his clinic in Malvern, Pennsylvania, and be with therapists who are doing this, so you can pick up how you are with people, how your pressure, you get to treat patients with them, and they treat you and you treat them, the therapist. So you pick up very quickly the art of it, rather than doing clinical ed like we did in PT. You do all your courses and then you go out in the clinic. No, do that clinical right away. And that then becomes the meaningful conversation for change. Long answer to your 5 minutes.
That's great. Magdalena, go ahead.
Just to add a little bit of what Carol was just saying about the 5 minutes, something I found helpful during courses is that sometimes they'll put music on, and we kind of let the music take us away while we're doing the techniques. And as a self-care practice, I recommend patients make a playlist for yourself with songs that have 5 minute long songs. So then you get out of thinking about, is it time to move on yet? And you kind of naturally move on as the music ends. But I raised my hand because I had a question for Brad Fullerton. about your it's prolotherapy that you apply.
Right.
In essence, yeah. So I'm a massage therapist and I treat patients who have a lot of success with prolotherapy. My question to you is, you're applying it to the areas that the pain is located at and those adjacent muscle attachments, is that correct? And then into the nerve endings?
Not exactly.
Not exactly.
For me, the way I have kind of worked out the way I was taught is to inject at painful enthesis, right? Where fibers attached to bone. That's the traditional prolotherapy approach. So, and so you end up treating broadly because you're treating all the tender spots. So that's traditional prolo. As I started learning biotensegrity, when I heard Steve talk the first time in 2001, and then started learning ultrasound 2001, about the same time, where's the loss of tension in the system is what I'm focused on.
Okay, yeah. So you're applying that global approach.
Right. So I explain to patients that the bones are not the frame of the body.
Yeah.
The frame of the body is the tension in the soft tissue, and the bones are floating in that frame, although the bones are also can be a tension or two, and they're soft tissue that's been hardened. So it's all one continuity of tension. So where's the loss of tension? So often it's away from where the pain is, right? So it's some old injury, and that if you lose a little tension in a fascial system, then the muscles that interact directly with that fascial system aren't at the right pre-stress, and they don't turn on at the right time in motion. And so you can be coordinated through one part of the motion, and then suddenly you lose a little control, and you'll get a little abnormal compression or shear, or not that there's truly shear in the body, right, Steve? But those abnormal forces that multiply over years of abnormal movement add up to what we recognize as degenerative arthritis, rotator cuff impingement, bursitis. And it's like they're predated by a loss of tension in soft tissue from other more minor injuries. A lot of times they're injuries that people don't recall until you keep asking them. So you've never fallen, and then finally they'll remember, right? I mean, you've all had that experience. It's like, oh yeah, I fell on my shoulder on my mountain bike 20 years ago. And I remember it hurt for a few weeks, but I never saw anybody about it.
Gotcha. And then just so I'm clear, there's the traditional type of prolotherapy, and then you've added another kind of type.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm clear with my clients. Yeah.
Well, for me, to me, prolotherapy to me is regenerative injection informed by biotensegrity. Because traditional, like regenerative injection that's being done now by lots of orthopedic surgeons is based on a traditional diagnosis, right? You have a rotator cuff tear, you put PRP in a rotator cuff tear, and that's the treatment. Whereas prolotherapy, you'll learn it's more of a system. You need to treat more broadly, right? So you learn that concept in traditional prolotherapy training. What I've added to the mix is you don't just treat attachments to bone, you treat where there are fascial planes that are disrupted, which is actually more common. And you think of muscles as what continuity of fascia. It's not a separate muscle. It's just a fascial system with muscle cells in it. And then you have to think about, where does that fascial system go from there? You know, you can see looseness in one area, but it may be because it's lax here because it's torn over here. And it's endlessly complex, right? So I have half-day appointments a lot with patients because they're chronic pain, they're traveling here, and we're trying to sort through all their old injuries and what's the most significant, where can we stimulate some repair and pre-stress adding back to the system, which is when you heal and actually repair and make new collagen, you're putting pre-stress back into the system. That's the way I look at it anyway.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I just want to say that we've been talking about stretching. You really don't do any stretching of these tissues. What you're doing is phase transitions and probably some unwinding of the coils of the helixes. but it's, we talk about stretching. I think we have to recognize that's not really what we're doing.
Are we thixotroping everything?
Right. That's close to it. That's close.
I'm gonna go thixotrope for 30 minutes later
Right.
today. Thank you, Stephen, for pointing that out.
Steve, can I clarify? So what we're doing is something that maybe we call stretching, like we're pulling on something,
Right.
or but what we aren't doing is bringing anything to a point of damaging deformation.
Right. We're not deforming the tissues in that way. We're changing them. And as you point out, the tissues are thixotropic, and some of them work the other way from thixotropic, but they have this quality of phase change. And phase change, by the way, takes energy. So there's a lot of energy exchange going in there. Like going from, boiling water to ice is a big, you have to put a lot of energy into it. In biologic tissues, you don't have to put nearly that kind of energy. Things happen much faster and at the same temperature, but you're still doing phase changing. And this phase of water that we've been talking about is also a part of this phase changing concept.
Mm-hmm.
So systems, thanks, Brad. Bye-bye. So systems, soft matter, oscillations, all these different things that we're bringing together. Cindy, did you have something you wanted to say? You had your hand up.
Sure, thanks. I will interject just a little bit. I wanted to ask Brad something, but now he's gone. So, but I don't know if those words were actually said. Carol, you can help me remember, but we use the saying in this work a lot called find the symptom, look elsewhere for the cause. And so Brad was kind of bringing that in there, but I've often had the question, and I'm a physical therapist and an exercise physiologist, been doing this work for 27 years. For patients who get the PRP, I often wonder when they're getting these injections and that joint, that whole area is just solidified. There's not flow of fluids. Certainly the flow of energy is stuck. And so do they see a difference in patients who maybe are more restricted that way and they're healing? Like, is that PRP even able to get into the cellular level when the body is like this concrete, when it should be more like Jello? So that was just a question that I had, but after hearing Brad, but also mainly talking about the awareness, and we were talking about the holding for the 5 minutes or more and that limitation. And it just, this morning, I had a patient who was able to have a 2-hour session, and we were on her low back for most of the first hour. And I've been wanting to do this with her for a while, and it just worked out well today. And we were both amazed at how she had no pain for the first time in months, many months, getting off of the table from a prone position after being on her back for that long. So it was just very exciting. And, when I was a new therapist, I couldn't even imagine doing that, but it just takes that practice of being in channel 3, and just so grateful for John for bringing that up.
What I'd like to add to that is that, Guy Barteau tells us there are no layers in fascia. There are densities. And when trauma hits, it hits at a certain density, perhaps, but we keep going. And then another trauma hits, and then another trauma hits. And so we pile up in our congealed densities. And when we're releasing, we release segmentally through the whole system, but it often takes time. That's why the intensives are so powerful. You've got 2 weeks, up to 2 weeks of 3 to 4 sessions a day, where people are working on that tissue, and you can't go back into your old holding patterns for fascia to just maintain its old space. You're able to free it up, in other words, in ways that short-term kind of therapy doesn't get at it. Posture is very powerful. People go into the same postures, and people are reinterested. They go to the gym. My patients often say, now can I go to the gym? And I say, well, you can, but I'd rather you didn't until we got this cleared up, because I think you're perpetuating patterns, and fascia will always do what it needs to do to keep you safe and to hold you. And what we're trying to do here is to give it a choice about tension and compression that will take away the pain. So
thank you. Rochelle put something in the chat about 15 minutes. Sometimes you have to sit there with the tissue. So I just wanted you, I know Rochelle from the, let's see, Applied Biotensegrity and Physiotherapy group. That's such a wonderful course. So Rochelle, can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I think it just goes along, continue to go along with what Cindy just said and Carol, and obviously what John talked about, is, John teaches that it takes that, 3 minutes, approximately 3 minutes for that collagen to even start to soften. And then you stay longer until you just keep sinking into the tissue and going into further restrictions. And I'm a physical therapist by trade. And when I started doing the work, I think like most of us, it just, like Cindy just said it, that 5 minutes seems impossible. But as you learn to tune into the patient, you learn to tune into channel 3 and to ground and center yourself, you just keep finding more restrictions. And, John will often teach how it's better to do less techniques in a session, spending more time on each technique than just trying to run around the body and do 10 or 15 or 20 techniques. And, again, this comes with practice, but what I've found through my work with my patients and doing John's work is that it's very true that, less is usually more, and spending that time in each spot, really just like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and Magdalena said about the song, that's a great technique too. Like just knowing your playlist has songs that are a minimum of 5 minutes kind of helps keep you on track. But honestly, once you really get into the work, if you're, as a therapist, when you're centered, you just flow with the patient, and it can, you can really keep your hands. Of course, your hands are moving in the sense that you're following the tissue, you're digging deeper, you're following where the restriction goes, but you're not sliding on the skin, and you're basically holding in that spot for sometimes a long time. But it takes a while to be able to be comfortable with that. But I've just found that's where the magic happens, the longer you can hold.
Thanks, Rochelle. And Kim, also from our physiotherapy group class.
PT group.
Yeah. So what I enjoy a lot about the Barnes approach is that it's using a manual technique to create releases in the body. Patients invariably feel that difference and say, how do I maintain this? So we do teach some self-treatment, but what I've liked about the Biotensegrity for physical therapy is there's that also involvement of movement and taking a look at the body through that lens of compression, tension, and I always now think about after the fact, how do I teach people to feel that? And Carol talked about injuries just a few minutes ago about the, the force of it. So forces have different intensities to them, but they also have different vibrations to them. And so sometimes when I had this aha moment, it's like, oh, maybe that's why it's the simplest little thing that the person does, and they have this incredible pain, and they don't understand why that simple little thing caused pain, but it's because the system over time hardened through those forces, and in that little teeny tiny vibration, or that little teeny tiny force was the thing that really broke the camel's back. And so Brad's not here, but I really appreciated hearing his information about the therapy that he does, because it's I've had patients do it and not really understand it, but it's like a lot of people have said, we are all trying to do the same thing with people's bodies, but it's just through different lenses and different approaches. and they're all having a direct impact on the fascial system. So it's just kind of an observation more than anything else.
Good, great. I might put in a plug for the Biotensegrity Physio course. It is a course. It's a 10 session course, 10 months, one week a month, 1 hour, 1 2-hour session a month. Or is it an hour and a half?
Hour and a half.
Where the physical therapy faculty present the way we were taught, and now from a new lens, a biotensegrity lens, and how that's changed our practice, from the way we were taught to incorporating the principles of biotensegrity. It will be available for signing up again soon. And I don't have is Mariana still on? Do you have the email?
No, she had to go.
It's I'm not sure what the
link is.
The link is, right. I don't have it.
I'm going to see if I can hunt that down.
Okay, and maybe put it in the chat. But we're having a lot of fun because the PTs are bringing in cases from their patients, and we're looking at their patients through a biotensegrity lens and how it shifts the way they're treating their patients. And so it's a lot of fun. And in each session, like this next Friday, I'm presenting systems theory, and Kutu from the Spaniard from Ireland is presenting fractality, and how fractality and chaos theory inform biotensegrity. And one of those comments that John said, that change happens in chaos, it really has to do, I think, more with the idea that we have to be shaken out of our habitual ways of thinking and moving and being in the world in order to be able to let in change that's going to be transformative. We can go through exercises, we can make our muscles stronger, we can get a better respiratory effect, we can help our hearts through cardiac rehab. But until the whole chaotic idea of who I am and what brought me to this point in the world, that was wrong thinking and wrong acting and not good for my body or my emotions or my mind, until that's challenged in a moment of chaos, very much often happens in unwinding, we then now have a choice to start thinking about things differently, to pondering differently, moving differently, treating our body minds differently. And many, many people who take these courses are moved to then become myofascial, the healing courses, or are treated by us, want to become myofascial therapists because they want to do this. They want to make this a part of their lives. And I think that that's the foundation of his comment about chaos, change and chaos. Well, we're running out of time here, Susan.
We are. And for those people who are not physiotherapists, Mariana Barreto and Leonid Bloom have a really good tensegrity applied therapy course that's on Thinkific. I don't have the link for that, but if you can't find it, contact me and I'll try to get it for you. It's really, really top notch. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not a quick and easy thing at all.
Leonid.
But it is really good and amazing. And I am learning more about biotensegrity through that course. So through both of these courses. So it's really wonderful. Carol, thank you so much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
What a treat.
And thanks to John Barnes as well for being willing to share his principles with us.
I want to toast you, Carol.
Our
closing toast, because you made this happen today.
Thank you, Susan.
And I'm so grateful. I like I say, John Barnes has been a part of my vocabulary since I started studying with Steve many, many years ago. And to get this deep dive into his history was such a treat.
Yes, thank you.
So Thank you to everyone who's here.
Thank you.
And we're so grateful. Graham, thank you for once again co-hosting, and Chris and Mariana had to leave, but and Steve Levin, everybody who's here today. Thank you so much.
And thank you, John.
And thank you, John Barnes. To you, Carol.
Cheers.
My great pleasure.